There is a part of jazz practice almost nobody talks about, and it is the reason most beginner solos don't sound like jazz at all. Now, once I figured out what was missing in my practice, my solos finally start getting that real jazz flow. And I've used the same method to help thousands of students do the same. So in this video, I'm gonna show you exactly what is missing and the simple way to fix it so that your solos finally flow like real jazz. Did you ever notice that online jazz lessons always show you what to play, so scales, licks, arpeggios, but almost never how to actually make music with them? You end up memorizing a lot of notes, but your solos still don't sound like jazz. In fact, they often sound robotic, like a bunch of ideas that don't quite connect. It's a bit like learning to cook. Imagine if every lesson just taught you how to shop for the best ingredients, but never how to turn them into a meal. You'd have a fridge full of great stuff, but no idea how to make dinner. And this is exactly what happens to most beginner jazz players. They collect musical ingredients, but their solos don't have any jazz flow. Joe Pass nailed what you need to get right.
The secret to filling something up is not playing arpeggios or playing runs. It's actually playing runs, but it's actually like making sure that you make the connection.
So how do you actually connect your ideas and get that real jazz flow? Now, before we dive into Joe Pass style lines, let me just show you the single most important exercise that almost every jazz beginner skips, and it fixes 90% of all soloing problems. Do you practice soloing like this? You pick a new scale or a lick, hit play on a backing track, and then try to squeeze it in everywhere, hoping that it magically fits and makes you sound better. But let's be honest, most of the time it just sounds bad and feels really forced. Now, working like this is just setting you up to fail. Here's the problem. Trying to improvise with brand new material while also keeping track of the chord changes, the groove, and the song's form is like trying to learn how to juggle while riding a bike. It's just too much at once and almost guaranteed to go wrong. Instead, you need to break things down. Think of it like learning to juggle while standing still first, mastering the moves one at a time before you add more challenges like riding a bike. And that is why this next exercise is so powerful, composing lines, but probably not in the way that you think. Instead of just collecting more licks, you'll actually create your own variations, and in that process, develop your sense of rhythm and your ear. This way of working is also how Peter Bernstein talks about learning phrases.
I start to learn someone's solo, and then I would say, wow, look what they do over C7, and say, okay, when they do that, what does that mean? You know, how are they bringing out the notes of that chord? What notes are they leaning on? So it would tell me, okay, well, if I play the same, that phrase, slightly different, but I can keep the idea of the phrase, then I'm learning how to make variations on something. So I would kind of learn bits and pieces of solos.
Let me show you how that might work, plus one thing that a lot of students get wrong about the exercise. Let's say that you want to incorporate this simple phrase, which is just a great way to make a C major 7 arpeggio sound good. Now, in this case, the main character is probably the arpeggio, so just that C major 7 with the two leading notes. And to me, how that high leading note sort of sits on the beat and then resolves is really what makes it sound great. The first step here is to stick to the same chord and then find different ways to continue. Something short. Or maybe a longer, more elaborate line. You can also move the arpeggio phrase into the bar and then find some ways to lead into it. But here's a huge misunderstanding that I see all the time. Some students will think, great, now I have even more licks to memorize. But that's not the point. The exercise is making the licks, not creating a collection of phrases to force into your solos. The more licks you make, the easier it becomes to use the new material in your own solos, and you're practicing to connect it to your vocabulary and making sure that you create lines that sound good. If you start by just playing over a song in time, it's probably going to end up in stress, panic, and what's even worse, practicing a lot of lines that don't work. You are in fact practicing to ruin your own playing. Let me show you how composing lines helps you with both rhythm and that flow that Joe Pass talked about. Have you ever played a solo where as soon as you finish a phrase, you have to stop and listen just to figure out where you are in the song? Now, this is a common problem, and it usually means that you're not fully connected to the groove and the form. So here's how you fix it. Practicing composing and improvising your lines out of time, but with a focus on the main jazz groove, the 8th note. In jazz, everything flows from heavy beat to heavy beat. Think beats 1 and 3. So even when you're composing and not playing in time, you want to hear those heavy beats as anchor points and build your phrases around them. It's like having invisible stepping stones through the song. When you practice this way, you train your ear and your fingers to always land melodies on those strong beats. And that way, your phrases will just naturally log into the form of the tune, and you never lose your place, even when you're making things up on the spot. But there is a catch. This only works if you also make sure to put the right notes on the heavy beats. Let me show you. If you're new to jazz, it can seem like magic when pros play those dense eighth note lines and somehow still sound musical and interesting. But for beginners, those lines often sound awkward and unclear. Compare these two phrases, which is not as clear and doesn't have as nice a flow as this. A lot of this is about which notes are used to make the sound of the chord change clear. The first example has the root of the chord on beat 1 for every bar, so the D and then the G, and finally the C, which is a bit heavy and actually a lot less clear than having the third in there, which is what I'm using in the second example, starting on first the F, and then the B, and also the E on C major 7. There are two notes you want to be able to put on those downbeats where the chord changes, and many jazz beginners get this wrong. You want to play the third or the fifth of the chord on the downbeat. Those are the strongest notes when it comes to hearing the chord change in a melody, like a solo line. And you'll see examples from Joe Pass in a bit where he does exactly that. So here's the beginner mistake. When you're told to outline chords, you're often taught to focus on the third and the seventh. And that's really great for comping because those notes really define the chord when they're played together. But in a melody, the seventh by itself doesn't always make the chord change clear. In fact, sometimes it barely moves from one chord to the next, so your ear doesn't really hear the chord change. So what should you do? Now, when you're soloing, aim to land on the third or the fifth of the chord on the downbeat when the chord changes. These notes give your lines clarity and make the harmony easier to hear, just like the pros do. And I'll get to that Joe Pass example in a second. But a quick warning, just hitting the right notes on the right beats isn't enough. If your lines don't have direction or connection, they still sound mechanical, like this. And that is where Joe Pass advice makes all the difference. Let's explore how to add jazz flow to your lines. If you want your solos to sound like jazz, your lines need to go somewhere. They need energy and forward motion. Remember what Joe Pass said at the start of this video.
The secret to filling something up is not playing arpeggios or playing runs. It's actually playing runs, but it's actually like making sure that you make the connection.
That is the real secret. Notice what he doesn't say. He doesn't tell you to learn more scales or practice faster arpeggios. He's not talking about cramming in more notes. Instead, he is laser focused on connection, making each phrase lead naturally to the next. And you can hear this in his own playing as well. Check out this example from the Joe Pass guitar style. What you want to notice is that the lines are really flowing to a note at the beginning of the bar. So first we have this moving to the A on F7. And then, of course, using that F sharp to get back on the G on C7. The good news, you can practice building lines with this kind of forward motion, but here's the twist. To do it well, you might need to start thinking about your solo lines backward. Let me show you. Do you ever catch yourself overthinking every chord change in your solo? So that's a C7. Should I play maybe an E half diminished? Or maybe an enclosure? If you're spending all your mental energy on picking the right scale or arpeggio for every chord, it's almost impossible to focus on adding forward motion to your lines. So here's the fix. Stop worrying about every single chord and start thinking about where you want your line to go. It is really a game changer. Instead of building your solo from the beginning, start with the destination, the note that you want to land on. For the C7, let's decide on a target note on F7 that you want to hit. Having target notes for chords makes everything a lot easier. Let's start with the third, A. Just a single note in a single place on the neck, just to keep it really simple. Now practice building lines that lead into that A. For example, you could use a C7 arpeggio and then an enclosure to approach the target note. Or maybe use the C7 arpeggio as the way to get to that A on F7. And of course, you can also use other common arpeggios on C7, like the E half diminished. When you practice this way, always aiming your phrases so they arrive at a strong target note, you'll notice that your solos start to flow naturally, just like the lines you hear from Joe Pass or Charlie Parker. It's not about cramming in more theory, it's about giving your music direction. Of course, you still need to build your jazz vocabulary so that you've got great ideas for every chord you come across. And if you want a solid start, check out the exercises that I cover in this next video. They'll give you a rock solid foundation in both harmony and phrasing so that your solos sound authentic, not just like a string of correct notes. Check it out, learn jazz, make music.